She decided to change right at the resort in response to me. My name is Robert and I'm 26. I've been dating my girlfriend Chris for 4 years. She's 23 and we live together in Atlanta, where life is great. Chris is originally from Alaska, as is her older sister, Julie, who is also 26 like me. They both moved to Atlanta for college many years ago, and that's where Chris and I first met. Over the years, I've grown close to Julie too. She's kind, reserved, and carries the scars of teenage trauma that have caused her to have difficult relationships with boys. Despite this, she's one of the most genuine people I've ever met, and I've always enjoyed her company. It was Julie's birthday recently, and I wanted to do something that would really make her feel celebrated. She's not the type to seek attention, but I thought this might be a chance to do something meaningful, not just for her, but for all three of us. I decided to surprise her with something she'll remember. Her birthday was held at her home on a cold December evening. The atmosphere was lively, with twinkling lights and the scent of spiced cider filling the air. Chris and I had arrived early to help set up. It was a decent-sized gathering: friends, acquaintances, and a few colleagues chatting, eating, and laughing. Julie seemed happy, if a little shy, as she always does in a crowd. After dinner, everyone gathered around for dessert, and the room became warm and lively. That's when I decided to reveal the surprise. I stood up, drink in hand, and called everyone's attention. Speeches aren't really my thing, but this one came naturally. I talked about how special Julie was, how she was one of the strongest, kindest people I'd ever met, and how grateful I was to know her. Chris smiled at me from across the table, her eyes shining with pride, and that gave me the push I needed to continue. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Julie," I said, "I wanted to get you something that wasn't just a gift, but an experience we could share." So I bought us 3 tickets to a ski resort in Alaska. The room was silent for a moment before the cheers and applause broke out. Julie looked stunned, her mouth slightly open as she processed what I just said. Chris was equally surprised, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. Julie finally smiled, a rare, unvarnished smile, and stood up to hug me. She whispered, "Thank you, Rob. This is incredible." It was a heartfelt moment that hit me right in the chest. Then Chris joined in, hugging me tightly and laughing. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" The rest of the evening was all about the trip. People gave us tips on where to go, what to pack, and how to make the most of Alaska. Julie seemed lighter, more animated than I'd seen her in years. Even Chris was excited, already making plans to buy winter gear. Seeing them both so happy, I felt like I'd hit the nail on the head. But looking back, I had no idea what this trip would bring. The weeks leading up to the trip flew by. Julie started spending more time at our place, browsing travel blogs and shopping for ski gear with Chris. They'd sit on the couch, laughing over childhood memories of Alaska, and I loved watching them reconnect. Julie even brought photo albums from when they were kids. It was sweet, though, and something felt different. Julie started being unusually attentive to me. It was subtle at first, like she'd laugh a little too loudly at my jokes or touch my arm while we were talking. One time, while we were all watching a movie, she pulled a blanket over the 3 of us, but ended up snuggling closer to me than to Chris. At first, I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to the growing closeness between us as we planned the trip. But every now and then, I'd catch her looking at me in a way that felt too intense, too personal. By the time we landed in Alaska, the 3 of us were filled with excitement. The ski resort was perfect: snow-capped mountains, cozy log cabins, and the kind of crisp air that made you feel alive. We spent the first few days skiing, sipping hot chocolate by the fire, and even going dog sledding. Chris was in her element, reminiscing about her childhood, while Julie seemed more confident and carefree than I'd ever seen her. When we finally arrived at the ski resort, I could feel the excitement sweeping over all 3 of us. The place was breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains stretching to the horizon, and the resort itself looked like something out of a postcard. Cozy wooden cabins, pistes dotted with lights that twinkled in the evening, and a sky so clear you could count the stars. Even the weather seemed to be on our side, with no sign of storms or heavy fog to spoil the atmosphere. It was the perfect place to get lost in the magic of winter. Julie and I were good skiers. We had tried it before, but Chris? Not so much. She had never been keen on skiing and mostly wanted to immerse herself in the winter wonderland. I think watching Julie and I glide down the slopes piqued her curiosity. After our first day of skiing, she confided, "I want to try it. It looks like fun." I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity like this. That evening, as we all sat cozily in the living room, sipping mulled wine by the fire, I suggested that we hire her a coach. Chris was hesitant at first. "I don't want to waste anyone's time," she said, but Julie and I encouraged her. Julie even joked, "Who knows? Maybe you'll be better than us by the end of the week." The next morning, we met her coach, a guy named Kyle. He was in his early 20s, skinny but athletic, with an easy charm that came from youth and confidence. He was already a master of competitive skiing, which made me feel like Chris was in good hands. Kyle introduced himself with a slight grin, saying, "We'll have you carving up the slopes in no time." Chris laughed, a little sheepishly, but clearly excited. At first, everything seemed great. Kyle was professional, patient, and genuinely passionate about teaching. He and Chris spent the mornings on the beginner slopes while Julie and I explored the more challenging runs. Chris beamed with pride every time she joined us for lunch, telling stories about how Kyle taught her to stop or how she mastered her first turn. But on the third day, I started noticing things. Maybe they were small things, but there were moments that made me think. For one, Kyle's attention to Chris seemed unusually focused. Sure, he was her instructor, and I knew he needed to pay attention, but sometimes his energy seemed to go beyond his work. He'd make playful jokes with her that lingered just a second too long, or laugh at something she said in a way that seemed a little warm. One afternoon, Julie and I were on the lift, heading out for another run, and I happened to glance down. I saw Chris and Kyle at the bottom of the hill. They'd both fallen. Nothing serious, just a tumble. But instead of getting right back up, they were rolling around in the snow, laughing like kids. It looked innocent enough from above. "Are you okay?" Julie asked, noticing my quiet. "Yeah," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "Just wondering if we should try the next slope." Later that evening, the three of us were sitting in the resort's restaurant, enjoying a hearty dinner. Chris was still bubbling with excitement about her day. "Kyle said I'm picking up speed really fast," she told us. "He even thinks I might be ready to try some intermediate runs tomorrow." Julie raised her glass in mock celebration. "To Chris, a future ski champion," she said, laughing. I joined in the toast, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't help but feel that Kyle's support might be more than just professional praise. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe seeing Chris so happy and confident after years of downplaying her athleticism was new to me, and I didn't know how to process it. But the doubt wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I saw Kyle and Chris together, it seemed like there was this energy between them, a spark I didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't ignore either. On the fourth day, Julie began to notice my mood. "You've been weird this trip," she said as we walked back to our cabin. "What's going on with you?" "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. Julie didn't believe me. "Come on, Rob. Spit it out." I hesitated. Could I really say what was on my mind without looking like a jealous idiot? "Probably nothing," I finally said. I think Kyle is being too friendly with Chris." Julie stopped and turned to me, her expression somewhere between embarrassment and surprise. "Too friendly? Rob, he's her ski instructor. He's supposed to be friendly." "I know," I said, feeling defensive. "But it's not just that. It's the way he looks at her, the way they joke around. It just doesn't seem right." Julie sighed, her breath visible in the chill night air. "Look, Chris isn't the type to, She loves you. You know that, right?" "Yeah, I do," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a glimmer of doubt. It all started to fall apart on day 5 of our trip. I'd like to say I didn't see it coming, but honestly, there were signs. Small ones that could have been written off as nothing. But in retrospect, these moments were cracks in the foundation, hints of what was brewing beneath the surface. I brushed aside my worries about Kyle, telling myself I was being paranoid. It had been a good day, at least on the surface. Chris insisted on pushing herself, so she spent a few hours with Kyle on some intermediate slopes while Julie and I stuck to the hard runs. By the evening, We were all exhausted, a pleasant tiredness, like you'd earned your rest. After dinner, Chris mentioned he wanted to unwind in the sauna before bed. Julie and I decided to stay in the lodge and watch a movie. It seemed harmless at first. About an hour later, Julie and I had finished watching some generic romantic comedy when I realized Chris still hadn't returned. I figured she might have been hanging out with some other guests, but something was nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Julie must have seen the tension on my face because she paused the movie and asked, "Everything okay?" "I'm just checking on Chris," I said, trying to keep my voice even. The sauna wasn't far away, just a short walk across the snowy grounds of the resort. The night air was sharp, and my breath came out in thick clouds as I trudged through the snow, each step heavier than the last. I reached the small building that housed the sauna, the windows fogged up from the heat inside. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to knock or just walk in. Something in me, the same part that had been whispering doubts all week, pushed me to open the door. The first thing that hit me was a wave of hot, humid air, scented with cedar. And there they were, Chris and Kyle, sitting on a wooden bench, so close their knees were touching. His hand was on her thigh, and her face was tilted toward his spread legs. And this wasn't a normal kiss. This was deep swallowing of his banana. I froze. It was as if the air had been knocked out of my lungs, and for a second I couldn't move. My chest tightened. My ears began to buzz, and I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it. But then Chris pulled back slightly, her fingers brushing Kyle's thigh, and all doubt was gone. The door slammed behind me as I walked in, and they both turned around sharply. Chris's face went pale, her mouth hanging open as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Kyle was confused as a kid caught stealing cookies. "What the hell is that?" My voice was low, more of a growl than words. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I could do was stare at the woman I thought I knew. "Rob, it's not what it looks like," Chris stammered, but her voice was shaking and she couldn't even meet my eyes. "It's not what it looks like?" I forced out a laugh, bitter and harsh. "You're kissing him between the legs, Chris. In this sauna. What else is it supposed to look like?" Kyle started to say something, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "Don't. Just don't." I turned to Chris, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. She didn't answer. "How long, Chris?" I demanded, louder this time. It just happened," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know why, Rob. I didn't think. Don't give me that crap." The room was stuffy, and I couldn't stand it anymore. "You know what? Stay here. Enjoy your coach's banana. I've had enough." With that, I stormed out, slamming the door. The cold air outside hit me like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. My thoughts were a mess, swirling with anger, pain, and disbelief. I trudged back to the cabin, my body moving on autopilot. When I opened the door, Julie looked up from the couch, her expression instantly changing from curiosity to concern. "What happened?" she asked, standing up. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, trying to find the words, but nothing felt right. Finally, I said, "Chris." I caught her with Kyle. In the sauna. Julie's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she said quietly, "Rob, I'm so sorry." I sat down on the edge of the couch, my head in my hands. "I don't even know what to do," I muttered. I trusted her. I thought we were safe. Julie sat down next to me, her hand gently on my back. "You don't deserve this," she said quietly. "None of this." There was something warm, comforting in her voice. When I looked up, her eyes met mine, and for the first time I noticed how close we were. The room was silent, except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. I don't know if it was anger or pain, or just a need to feel something other than pain, but before I could think about it, I leaned in. Julie didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in too, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that was both unexpected and electric. We didn't stop there. The night had turned into something I couldn't have predicted, something rough and impulsive. Julie wasn't just Chris's sister anymore. She was the person who'd been there when everything was falling apart, trying her hardest to make us right, riding me like it was her last. And in that moment, I didn't care if it was right or not. I just needed her. I can't even describe the way it flowed out of her. When I woke up the next morning, the weight of what had happened hit me like a freight train. Julie was still asleep next to me, her face peaceful in the dim light of the cab. I sat up, my thoughts racing. What have I done? What does this mean? And where the hell do we go from here?